In card games, not all cards are created equal, and that's a good thing. If every single card was around the same power level, we'd have a very annoying and fragile ecosystem. Still, sometimes Konami prints cards that are so noticeably above the rest that they become ingrained into the player base's collective consciousness. Today, we'll be taking a look at part 2 of the strongest ones to rise above their competition, mainly looking at the individual strength of the card itself, rather than it being a small piece in a larger machine. We'll also be skipping over some very obvious cards you probably are tired of hearing of, like Pot of Greed and Graceful Charity, since it's universally accepted they are some of the strongest cards ever put into paper. And without further ado, let's start the list off at number 10 with Kashtira Arise-Heart. The Visa Starfrost lore has given us a pretty big list of impactful and powerful cards, from the Scareclaws, which were quickly demoted to beat an engine in better decks, to the all-powerful Tearlaments, a contender for the strongest archetype in the game's history, ending with Mannadium, which has also seen its fair share of relevance ever since its release. Each of these archetypes features a Heart main deck monster meant to be a different incarnation of Visa Starfrost, and another extra deck version which acts as the evolved form of the original. Scareclaws brought Scareclaw Tri-Heart, Tearlaments brought Tearlaments Kaleido Heart, and Mannadium gave us Mannadium Prime Heart. While all of these are admittedly powerful cards in their own right, they failed to reach the sheer power of Kashtira Arise-Heart. This rank 7 monster acts as the boss monster to the Kashtira deck. This deck, centered around level 7 monsters, has a never-before-seen gimmick, banishing face-down cards coupled with blocking zones. The very well-known Kashtira Fenrir is a staple in a wide variety of decks thanks to the easy summoning conditions the archetype bolsters, coupled with a strong search effect and a useful permanent removal. And while the deck as a whole obviously features extremely powerful cards like the aforementioned Fenrir, Kashtira Unicorn, and Kashtira Birth, none compare to the sheer power of Kashtira Arise-Heart. This rank 7 monster requires 3 level 7 monsters to be XE summoned, but can also be overlaid onto any Kashtira monster during the turn in which the effective Kashtira Shangri-La was activated. Shangri-La being another one of the rank 7s, this one only requiring 2 materials, and locking an opponent's zone whenever one of their cards becomes banished face down, as well as granting protection and summoning from the deck during the standby phase. Once summoned, Arise-Heart has 3 different effects, all of which interact with another. First, it has the continuous effect that causes any card sent to the graveyard to be banished instead. Secondly, and limited once per chain, whenever a card is banished, it attaches a banished card to itself as a material, this being a mandatory effect. Last but not least, as a quick effect, you can detach 3 materials from itself to target any card in the field and banish it face down. If you play during Photon Hypernova format, surely you know the power of this card. The period immediately after the end of Tearlament's reign was filled with a variety of decks, but the one that stood at the top was no doubt Kashtira. And the biggest reason for their dominance is this card. Macrocosmos was limited for years, and having the same effect on an extra deck monster with additional utility is completely insane. But a 3 material rank 7 isn't that easy to make if you stop to think about it, which is why Arise-Heart includes a much easier way to bring it out, letting you slap it on top of any Kashtira monster if Kashtira Shangri-La activated its effect that turn. In slower game states, this means its standby phase effect to summon a Kashtira monster from the deck. Interestingly, since it doesn't specify which player's Shangri-La needed to be activated, you could also fulfill its summon condition if your opponent's Shangri-La activated that turn. But realistically, the way you bring it out most often is through now the infamous Zone Lock combo. By banishing Kashtira Big Bang with Kashtira Arise-Heart, you could then trigger Shangri-La to lock one of your opponent's zones. Coupled with the now banned number 89 Diabolus the Mind Hacker, this meant you'd be locking down 5 of your opponent's zones and ending on an Arise-Heart on top of that. Furthermore, Arise-Heart features a way of removal exclusive to the Kashtira archetype, and it's its strongest in this card, the ability to banish any card face down. In case you didn't know, there's very few ways of getting back a banished card that's face down. Only cards that don't specify the kind of card they can return from the banishment can, such as Cyframe Lord Omega and Paleozoic Lena Choilia. Oh, and Kashtira Arise-Heart too. The fact that this card recycles all of your cards, giving itself the ability to banish more cards, is absolutely insane. During its legality, this effect would usually attach cards you banished with Pot of Prosperity and never intended to summon, but ran for their effects when used as an Xyz material or sent to the graveyard. This is why we saw Kashtira decks running Infinite Goliath and Fossil Warrior Skull Knight, to capitalize on their effects. Funnily enough, this effect could very well also be the card's biggest weakness. The fact that this effect is mandatory means that your Arise-Heart is going to activate at any time a card gets banished, whether you like it or not. This means that it was susceptible to the format's most played hand trap, Psyframe Gear Gamma. Since Arise-Heart's effect has to activate no matter what, players could force it up by activating a search spell that would get banished, or even more demolishing, evenly matched. But even with all these counters, Kashtira Arise-Heart became the boogeyman of the format, which earned him a deserved banning. Continuing the trend of busted Xyz monsters, we have number 95 Galaxy Eyes Dark Matter Dragon at number 9. This rank 9 Dark Dragon monster with 4000 attack and 0 defense requires 3 level 9 monsters in order to be summoned. Once summoned, it can force your opponent to banish 3 monsters from the deck at the cost of sending 3 dragons with different names from your deck to the graveyard. In case you haven't realized, this is not much of a cost at all. On top of all of that, Dark Matter can detach material to be able to attack 2 monsters during the battle phase. So, this card is cracked, yes, but 3 level 9 monsters? That's just asking too much. Or it would be if it didn't also have the effect where you can just summon on top of any Galaxy Eyes Xyz monster you control, most of which are generic rank 8s. Dark Matter Dragon was the main enabler for the OCG's Mythic Ruler build of the Dragon Ruler deck, using Mythic Tree Dragon in tandem with Mythic Water Dragon to go into either number 62 Galaxy Eyes Prime Photon Dragon, or number 107 Galaxy Eyes Tachyon Dragon, to then rank up into Dark Matter. But this wasn't limited to the Mythic Dragons. You actually had a bunch of great options, from Blue Eyes White Dragon Engine to use Malazima the Emperor to just normal summon a level 8. What number 95 Galaxy Eyes Dark Matter Dragon gave the Dragon Ruler deck was the insane ability to flood your graveyard with either the Dragon Rulers themselves or powerful dragons that you wanted in the grave, like Eclipse Wyvern or the White Stone of Legend. Thankfully, this Dark Matter Dragon Ruler deck had a very short life, lasting only around 2 weeks before Konami decided to ban all of the Dragon Rulers before the deck could completely tear the format apart. After this, Dark Matter went into a bit of a slumber, since there weren't really any good Dragon decks that could make use of it. This changed drastically come 2018 with the arrival of the Guard Dragons and Thunder Dragon monsters. Chaos Thunder Dragon was a deck chock full of powerful dragons with graveyard effects that had no problems whatsoever making rank 8s, and featured some of the strongest cards in the format. This deck ended up being the tipping point of the card's balance and ended up getting banned for good. There it remains to this present day, and is very unlikely to come back because, well, 3 Foolish Burial effects as a cost is a bit too strong. Seems like Konami loves overpowered Xyz monsters. As for number 8, we have True King of all Calamities. This generic rank 9 Dark Worm has 3000 attack and defense, and requires 2 or more level 9 monsters to be Xyz summoned, and features one of the most crippling effects any card can have. As a quick effect, once per turn you can detach material to declare an attribute, and then make all monsters on the field that attribute until the end of the turn. Sounds underwhelming, right? Well, also, all monsters with that attribute your opponent controls cannot activate their effects or attack. This applies to monsters in their hand and graveyard, and not only the field. Ever since he was released in Maximum Crisis, True King of all Calamities was pretty much never played. Summoning 2 level 9s was not an easy task, and decks dedicated to that usually had to use most of their resources to just achieve that and that alone. The one deck to make use of it was True King Dinos, running into the first place at the 2017 World Championship. This deck made use of the pairing between Baby Sorceress and True King Lithozajim the Disaster, as well as the one between Suwani Fire of the Yangzing and True King Aghanimazud the Vanisher, to amass massive advantage and end on a 9 Pillars of the Yangzing with True King of all Calamities. This caused the aforementioned Lithozajim to be banned together with Miscellaneous Source, putting an end to the tyranny of Calamities until the release of Virtual World. This Psychic/Worm archetype was centered around some of the least used levels for monsters in the extra deck, level 6 and 9 for Synchros, as well as rank 6 and 9s for Xyz. While the engine of the deck was very strong, featuring powerful cards such as Shen Shen and Quan Lun, where the deck really shined was in summoning rank 9 monsters. Thanks to enablers like Cloud Castle, Virtual World had no issues with bringing out our Floodgate friend. This, coupled with the deck's other plays, meant that your ideal combo ended with Virtual World Gate Shush to destroy a card, Ash Blossom and Joyous Spring search with Chao Feng Phantom of the Yangzing, and not 1, but 2 True King of all Calamities. Yeah, 2. You even use the first one on your own turn to declare light and turn off your opponent's Nibiru the Primal Being. But this Psychic deck proved too strong to really justify its existence, and the rank 9 eventually got banned, showing us once more that floodgates that you can summon from your extra deck tend to be a little bit too broken. And speaking of floodgates, our number 7 card takes the cake as probably the most hated card in the game's history, Mystic Mine. If you play the game at any point during this card's relevance, you most likely have some sort of PTSD related to this field spell. In case you were lucky enough to dodge this card's omnipresence, let me remind you, Mystic Mine is a field spell which makes it so whichever player controls the most monsters cannot activate monster effects or attack, and destroys itself during the end phase if both players control the same number of monsters. While it sounds innocent enough at first, this card quickly proved itself to be one of the biggest problems the game would face. Originally, the card was played as, well, a floodgate. Dedicated Mystic Mine decks were quick to pop up, featuring some of the weirdest cards to ever see play, like a Goddess Cult Oracle and DD Guide, all the ways to lock your opponent with useless monsters and to control the cards they draw. While strong enough, getting some decent results from time to time, the Mystic Mine Stun deck never quite became a meta deck to consider a real threat. With time, however, people realized that you could just play Mystic Mine in whatever deck. While going first, the card did very little if anything, it really shone when going second. Resolving Mystic Mine against an established board with monsters could easily mean curtains for your opponent. The card essentially locks down your opponent from playing and forces them to just draw into the out or simply lose from deck out. Not just that, but decks started to be built around this floodgate. Sky Striker decks began playing max copies of Mystic Mine coupled with ways to search it, since just passing out a Sky Striker Link monster with some back row and a Mystic Mine meant that the moment your opponent summoned 2 or more monsters, they could no longer play the game. The cherry on top of this floodgate cake, however, has to go with the twisted mind of Joshua Smith during the 2022 European Championship. He discovered that you could not just force your opponent to draw the out for Mystic Mine 1 time, but 2. By summoning Beat Cop from the Underworld, you could use her effect to place a counter on Mystic Mine, which made it indestructible to card effects at once, meaning your opponent needed 2 cards through Mystic Mine instead of just 1, which was, well, annoying. The field spell ended up finding a place in nearly every deck in the game in some form or another, and forced players to play a lot of back row removal dedicated exclusively to out Mystic Mine, or simply accept a loss to it. After dodging a shocking amount of bans, Konami finally decided to ban the card across all formats, to the celebration of the whole community. Spell cards are some of the strongest cards in the game, and our number 6 spot keeps up this tradition with Soul Charge. This normal spell allows you to special summon any number of monsters from your graveyard, losing 1000 life points for each, and not being able to conduct your battle phase when you activate the card. So, in case you haven't realized, this is like 5 Monster Reborn stapled together. Originally used by Raphael in the Duel Monsters anime, the anime effect had a cost of only 500 life points per monster, and only restricted the monsters you summoned from attacking. Konami realized this would be too strong and decided to nerf it a bunch, which did absolutely nothing. After all, in Yu-Gi-Oh, the only life points that really matter is the very last one, and paying any amount of life points to easily swarm the field with as many monsters as you wanted was just absolutely insane. Released in Dragons of Legend, this card had an immediate impact, being played not only across the board, but also making some decks become tier 1 meta threats, most notably Sylvan's, a deck that lived and died by Soul Charge. Limited fairly quickly after its release in October 2014, this meant the demise of the Sylvan deck, as it really needed Soul Charge. However, it stayed legal for a lot longer than people really realized, all the way until January 2019, in the same list where Topologic Gunpowder Dragon was banned. Turns out, in a post-Link world where just getting monsters out of the grave was more valuable than ever, summoning back up to 5 at no real cost was simply too strong. The best example of this exploitation of free bodies is one of the most unique decks of its time, Soul Charge Turbo. While the power of the spell was limited, Saryuja Skuldred was not. This deck made use of a bunch of extenders to turbo out as many Saryujas as needed until you drew Soul Charge, then activating to bring back some specific tuners in order to summon both Naturia Beast and Naturia Barkion, more than enough to beat most decks in the format. Combo decks before the release of Nibiru the Primal Being were truly something a thing of beauty. But yeah, this constant cycling between busted combo decks that either hand-looped you, passed onto completely unaddable towers, or directly ended the game in the first turn, which was facilitated by Soul Charge to some extent, and thus got it banned for good. But if we're talking about broken spell cards, nothing beats the really early ones. Like our number 5 spot, the Forceful Sentry. Released all the way back in 2002's Spell Ruler, this normal spell allows you to look at your opponent's hand, choose any card in it, and shuffle it back into the deck. No cost, no restriction, no limitations, just pure insanity. While not as flashy as Soul Charge, the power of this card is pretty much unparalleled when it comes to this sort of effect. Not too long ago, a Pointer of the Red Lotus was deservedly banned. That was a trap card which cost 2,000 life points to activate, revealed your whole hand, banished the card instead of shuffling to the deck, and returned it at the end of the turn. And still it was too good. The Forceful Sentry not only gives you perfect information on what your opponent has in store for you, which is one of the best advantages you can have in the game, and having no cost at all whatsoever to it is pretty nice, but being able to just snipe out their best card returning it to their deck for good is completely out of this world. While most people know Yatagarasu as the win condition for the infamous Chaos Emperor Dragon and Voivodian hand loop combo, it was perhaps even stronger in the hand control deck of 2003. This deck leveraged cards that easily remove cards from your opponent's hand, like Delinquent Duo, Confiscation, Dong Zalug, and the Forceful Sentry, to reduce their hand size to a minimum, then use Yatagarasu to keep them from regaining card advantage. This deck promoted some of the most uninteractive Yu-Gi-Oh! To ever exist, effectively denying opponents from the chance to play the game in a period where you wouldn't be out of place normal summoning Giant Rat and passing turn. This felt like a modern combo deck in the Stone Age, and showed Konami the extreme power hand control effects had, especially as generic as the Forceful Sentry. Since its banning in 2004, the card has remained banned, and is almost certain it will never see the light of day ever again, and thank Konami for that. Coming back to some more recent cards, we have the very short-lived Linkross. Printed in April 2020 in Eternity Code, it was banned come December. This Link 1 monster is pretty unique all things considered, requiring a Link 2 or higher monster as a material. Once summoned, you're able to summon one token up to the Link rating of the monster used for its summon, but you cannot use them for Link materials that turn. This card birthed a bunch of insane combos, which essentially any deck could exploit. One of the decks that saw the most use in was, funnily enough, Eldritch. This usually slow control deck could play one card combos featuring Jet Synchron, which would let you do pretty much whatever you wanted in the game. What you usually did though was using the Linkross tokens as materials for single plays enabled with Cryston Halqifibrax, Mecha Fantabeast Auroradon, in order to draw from 1 to 4 cards and summon Borreload Savage Dragon together with Herald of the Arc Light, as well as whatever Eldritch spells and traps you drew into your starting hand or through your combo. And that's just one deck. Linkross was played in a wide range of strategies, but the combo was essentially the same most times. Start with the tuner, make Halqifibrax, get Despot 001, make Linkross, make Auroradon, and then do whatever you want. This card had players saying Martial Meta Marcher should be banned. That's how bad it was. Heck, even Blue Eyes White Dragon could utilize it for silly combos with Guard Dragons and rank 8s. That's how good the card was. This was also a weird period in the game's life as we were just starting to deal with the pandemic. The impact this event had in Yu-Gi-Oh! Is obviously huge, and being stuck doing remote duels with Adamantipator combos enabled thanks to this Link 1 was not something I'd recommend anyone, and thus the card was banned, together with some other not so enjoyable combo enablers like Smoke Grenade the Thief. Linkross's partner in crime summons itself from the deck into our number 3 spot for Cryston Halqifibrax. Yeah, we were all expecting this one, I know. This Link 2 menace requires 2 monsters, including a tuner, to be summoned. Once Link summoned, it summons a level 3 or lower tuner from your hand or deck, making it so it cannot activate its effects that turn. It can then, during your opponent's turn, banish itself to special summon a tuner synchro monster from your extra deck, treating it as a synchro summon. This card broke the game. During the start of the Link era, Konami was trying to find the proper balancing for Link monsters. One of this mechanic's biggest limitations during this period was the fact that you had to play Link monsters to play your deck, no matter what you were trying to do. To combat this, Konami made the wise decision to release a bunch of archetypal support Link monsters, and included them all in this same set, which came to be known as Link Vrains Pack, at least in the OCG. This set gave us some forgettable monsters like Master King Arcfiend, Stillswarm Origin, and Mermail Abysslacia, which came and went with no real relevance in any dimension. It also gave us some of the most broken cards the game has ever seen. The first Link Vrains pack gave us Curious, the Lightsworn Dominion, Erratic Seal of the Heavenly Spheres, Isolde, Two Tales of Noble Knights, a Rosemary Jasmine, Cherubini, Ebon Angel, the Burning Abyss, Heavy Metal Foes Electromite, and of course Cryston Halqifibrax. All of these in one set. And then they decided to make another one twice. These are some of the most overpowered sets in the game's history, featuring Link monsters that defined entire formats. But I digress. Cryston was a deck that never quite made a splash in the metagame, and Halqifibrax was designed to remedy that. It truly feels like a Cryston card. It's just a shame that it has no card text relating it to Crystons. Doesn't require one to be summoned, doesn't summon a Cryston tuner, doesn't summon a Cryston synchro, just completely generic. From its original release in the OCG in 2017, the card became a staple in most extra decks, being one of the craziest enablers to ever exist, making forgotten cards become meta threats. Essentially, any decent tuner monster became either a one-card combo or a combo piece for said one-card combo. Funnily enough, the card took a very long time to be imported to the TCG, almost 3 years from its original release of the OCG, causing a great schism between the formats. But once released, it took the format by storm, making combo decks the norm, especially with Tandem Mecha Phantom Beast Auroradon, causing the bannings of pretty much every decent tuner around. Cards like Glow Up Bulb, True the Last Dragon's Frizon, and Jet Synchron were hit for this reason. Easy access to Halqifibrax. With time, as its surrounding problem cards were slowly removed, and the aftermath of Link Reigns packs were being cleaned up, Cryston Halqifibrax found a home in pretty much any deck for different reasons. As it turns out, most decks can just include a couple of tuners to make some crazy combos. Not just that, even Sky Strikers played this card, since it was a one-card Axis Code Talker when summoning Effect Veiler into a Selene Queen of Master Magicians, so that should really tell you how omnipresent this Link 2 guy was. Going back to the old school spells, we have one of the most infamous ones for a number 2 spot, Painful Choice. This is the best spell in the game, easily. Simply choose 5 cards from your deck, your opponent adds one of them to your hand, then you send the rest to the graveyard. Easy as that. Foolish Burial for 4. Yeah, sure, why the heck not? Not only does it replace itself, since one of those cards you get to choose and gets added to your hand, it also gives you the best graveyard setup to ever exist in the game. While yes, the card had a very short lifespan, being banned even before we really got cards that wanted to be in the graveyard, pick a deck. Any deck. It would probably run Painful Choice. Snake Eyes? Yeah, let's fill my grave with Snake Eyes Flamberg Dragon and place my Snake Eyes Poplar in the back row. Tenpai? Okay, choose one of these 1 OTK cards and give me the rest, which will be resources I can get back. Branded? Sure, I'll trigger all these effects and search Branded Fusion, do whatever I want. Tearlaments? This would just be a war crime. During the card's actual legality, it usually sent multiple Synergist Serpents to get massive advantage, or simply to set up your graveyard with light and dark monsters to use for your chaos monsters, or just set up for Dark Magician of Chaos, which would get you Painful Choice back. During early Yu-Gi-Oh, there were a lot of design mistakes, which should be expected for a developing game. Cards like Pot of Greed or the Forceful Sentry are obviously overpowered even by today's standard, but Painful Choice is easily the strongest card of this early design era, and the one that's become even more powerful with time and will only continue to become more and more strong with new card releases. Sometimes Konami decides to errata cards, bringing their power down enough to unban them, oftentimes nerfing them far too much for them to be any sort of playable. Painful Choice, however, would need to be completely redesigned if you ever want to unban it. There is no universe where an effect like this can be allowed to exist in Yu-Gi-Oh! And last, but certainly not least, is, of course, a Link monster. Exactly, it's Summon Sorceress at number 1. Now, we just talked about erratas nerfing cards into unplayability, and Summon Sorceress recently received one as well as an unbanned in the OCG, and it has pretty much no success. So we will only be considering the pre-errata version of this card. This Link 3 monster requires 2 or more monsters of the same type, which are not tokens, and when summoned, allows you to summon a monster from your hand to the zone that she points to on your opponent's field. It can then, as a once per turn effect, special summon 1 monster from your deck with the same type as any monster she's pointing to, but with its effects negated. For 2/3 of the Link era, we were caught in a continuous loop of unfair combo decks. It felt like every month there was a new absurd enabler that would ruin your fun until the next ban list, and among them, none were as strong as Summon Sorceress. This card allowed a myriad of decks to emerge, from Pendulum Magician decks summoning whichever spellcaster they wanted from their decks, Lunalight summoning whichever Beast Warrior they preferred, and most relevant among them, Goki just summoning warriors and ruining your day. Indeed, among the combo decks that permeated the format, none could make better use of Summon Sorceress than Goki. This deck had swarming for days, benefited the most from fetching warriors from deck, and cared the least about the monsters being negated. And that's not even mentioning the FTKs, because of course this card caused FTKs. In my opinion, the funniest among them was the Golden Duo FTK. Essentially, you summon Golden Duo to your opponent's field, negate its effects, then summon Red Eye's Flare Metal Dragon and Agave Dragon to burn your opponent for a little bit. After your opponent takes damage, Golden Duo activates and resolves negated, with Flare Metal burning your opponent infinitely. But yeah, pretty much any deck could use her for whatever they sought to achieve. In the end, Summon Sorceress serves as the best reminder of the limitations extra deck monsters should have, and that extra deck cards that interact with the main deck are usually a recipe for disaster. Hey you, are you tired of boring, predictable merch? Wouldn't you love it if you could have something more exciting? Something with a random chance to give you more than what you spent on it, but in a legally distinct way that's not gambling? Well, we have nothing like that for you, but we do have something pretty similar. Introducing the TheDuelLogs TCG Mystery Box. It comes with playmats, card sleeves, a deck box, and not 1, but 2 TheDuelLogs mini plushies. Individually, all these items would cost over $130, but if you buy them all together in the mystery box, it's only $59.99. being less than half the price if you bought everything individually on the TheDuelLogs store. Order yours today. Check the link in the video description or the display under the video.